Hello and welcome to the first episode of the A to Z Poll podcast. My name is Zachary Siegel, and today we're going to be going over my preseason top 25. Well, preseason plus week zero. There's a lot of chaos that happened in that first inaugural week, and we're going to talk about it. But first, starting at number one this week, I have put the Ohio State Buckeyes. I think this team really took a step forward this offseason, absolutely attacking the transfer portal, adding Chip Kelly as the offensive coordinator, and really allowing Ryan Day to take a step back and focus on head coaching, really manage from above instead of being down in the nuts and bolts with everyone else. I imagine they did this partially because they watched Michigan, their arch rival, win the national championship last year. That has to be tough on any program. Ohio State has been a championship caliber team now for a decade, and only come away with one is definitely something that this fan base and this program is not too pleased with. I expect Ohio State to be viewing this season as national championship win or bust, and frankly, I can't see a different way to think about it. Number two, who you could argue is number one, but in my poll it's not. Georgia. Georgia Bulldogs are the very similar to the team that they were just a couple years ago, right? Kirby Smart, arguably the best head coach in college football right now. He had he has a veteran quarterback in Carson Beck. He has probably the most depth skill position groups, and I mean that defense is going to be again incredibly disgusting, right? We'll see week 1 what happens against Clemson. We'll see if it's an SEC supremacy kind of thing, or if maybe they have lost a step, but I personally do not think that this team has lost much of a step after going back to back years as national championships and just narrowly missing the college football playoffs based off some internal committee politics after losing the SEC championship to Alabama. Coming in at number 3, the Oregon Ducks. Dan Lanning choosing to stay in Eugene should say it all, right? He was the first choice over Kalen DeBoer to go to Alabama, and he said no. He likes what he's building. He just got a shiny new transfer quarterback in Dylan Gabriel, and he's ready to make a run for this thing. I mean, he came real close last year, right? A couple plays go his way against Washington, and that's him competing against Texas in the Rose Bowl, right? That's him competing against Texas and possibly competing against Michigan. And I mean, who knows what happens from there, right? Oregon has gotten, if anything, more talented. They got Tez Johnson on the outside, and they can really focus on what makes Dylan Gabriel a good quarterback. He doesn't have to stretch the field and be all of that while, like he was in Oklahoma. He has the flexibility to be just more of a game manager, which not taking anything away from Gabriel, but seems to be just a little more of his style of play. Coming in at number 4, Texas, right? Texas is are they back? Maybe. I don't know. Who am I to say? But I do think that Texas is coming for the SEC, and I think they're going to have a great inaugural season. They have some tough games. They got Michigan, they got Oklahoma. But I mean, after taking down Alabama last year and coming close the year before, and Quinn Ewers now a couple years newer, I mean, we saw the emotion after he lost last year to Washington. This team is going to be great. I mean, the only real question mark I have right now is how do they replace CJ Baxter? And if that turns out to be detrimental, then that's going to be really tough for this team. But as of now, with Isaiah Bond and with Quinn Ewers and, worst comes to worst, Arch Manning, I think this Texas team is in a really great spot to make a run now. And I absolutely expect to see them in the playoffs. Here's where things get interesting, right? Number 5, I have Alabama. Now, I think that Nick Saban leaving, right, retiring, and to be fair, he didn't completely just cut ties, right? We heard the reports of him on, right afterward, not going on vacation, not doing anything else, but staying in the Alabama clubhouse and calling his recruits and calling his transfers and add, pleading with them to stay. Not pleading, but trying to convince him to stay. But for a team that lost, arguably the greatest head coach of all time, you would think, wow, they have to take a step back. But I mean, this Alabama team is still one of the most talented teams. They've built what Nick Saban built, the culture that he has that he built there is the culture just in that building is that they're still Alabama and that the SEC, at least they believe it runs through them. And hiring Kalen DeBoer it is was a great option, right? Like I mentioned earlier, Dan Lanning was the first option, but I mean he's really 1A to one to Kalen DeBoer's 1B, right? They are both two of the best coaches in college football right now, and Kalen DeBoer has done nothing but win no matter where he's been. Just took Washington right to a national championship. I'm not sure if he'll. I'm not sure. How Jalen Milroe turns out this year with a new coach and how some of this new talent works out. But I'm pretty confident in Kalen DeBoer, and I'm pretty confident in the Alabama way right now. It's a little difficult to root against them at the moment. Next up at number 6, we have the Missouri Tigers, right? Mizzou, a team that really hasn't been super relevant outside of the last couple years. Like SEC uh, back of the train at the SEC most of the time, but now it seems like they're putting together some real talent, right? They're looking to be a top 5 or better SEC contender this year. They have, in my opinion, the best wide receiver in college football and a very, very serviceable quarterback to go along with it. Their defense is looking as stout as ever, and it's not like their run game is going to be bad. They got transferred from App State, Nate Noel, coming in to help with this running back committee, and I think that it's going to be just as they're going to be just as good this year, if not better. And I really think they could have a very impressive season record wise, considering their schedule is nothing compared to what it was last year. They don't have to go face Georgia this year. They have a much, much more palatable schedule this year. And I think this is going to come back and it could be a very Missouri year. Right behind Missouri, I have the Ole Miss Rebels. Ole Miss took a big loss with Quinshawn Judkins transferring to Ohio State, but they still had one of the most explosive offenses last year. If we look back to that LSU Ole Miss game where it was just back and forth and back and forth. I mean, the final score was they collectively put over 100 points on the board. They Jackson Dart, real case for Heisman, real case to be an elite first round talent quarterback coming into this year or coming out of this year. And they are, just as up there, just as capable as any other SEC talent. Next, we got Michigan, the current MacGuffin holders, might I add. They're the reigning national champions, and but it kind of doesn't feel like it, right? They have the whole scandal, which I'm not going to get into. They have they have their head coach leaving. They have their quarterback leaving. They have one of their veteran running backs leaving. They have a lot of veteran talent leaving, but they have a lot of people still there, right? Like it's not like they lost everyone. Last year with Jim Harbaugh facing so many suspensions, Sharon Moore coached the bulk of the season, right? So it's not like this is going to be a shock to the senses seeing Sharon Moore on the sideline and not Jim Harbaugh. Not to mention they have, Donovan Mitchell. It's not like Alex Orji was a transfer in, assuming he starts. They still have Graham in there. They still have a lot of veteran talent that is more than capable of proving to us why they won a national championship. I have them at 8, mainly because of what we've been seeing. Um, Mainly what we've been seeing in the news about them, and I'm just worried it's going to be more of a distraction. But we could absolutely see a Michigan playoff berth, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were playing for the Big Ten overall. Coming in at number 9, Utah, the first representative of the Big 12 here. It seems like in general, Utah has been the consensus what people think will be the winner. I think the Big 12 is going to be incredibly deep, and I think they're going to eat themselves alive throughout this whole process. And therefore, Utah could be the sole representative of the Big 12. That being said, they get Cam Rising back this year, one of the best and most talented quarterbacks, coming back for his seventh year of college football. I mean, he missed all of last year, but when Kyle Whittingham and Cam Ward have played together, they have pretty exclusively won their division, right? They have played in a lot of important games and played in a lot of important games well, right? Right. We remember what happened when Caleb Williams and USC uh, played Utah, right? Didn't go out in their favor. We all thought that they were going to come in and just roll them, and at least I did, and it didn't happen, right? So we're gonna see what happens this year, but it's I can definitely see Utah being a 3 or 4 seed in the playoff this year, and hopefully not, but maybe the only representative of the Big 12. Number 10. So we're officially in the area where it has changed since the preseason before week 0. But number 10, the Penn State Nittany Lions. This team has spent the better part of the last decade, really the better part of the last 15 years, playing second fiddle to Ohio State and Michigan. They are probably pretty sick of that. And luckily, they don't have to run this gauntlet again. Now with the new expanded Big 12 without divisions, they just don't have to run the gauntlet the way that they used to have to run it. There's a lot more flexibility and ability for them to really take that next step. And with a 12-team playoff, they can afford those couple losses if they do end up having to run the gauntlet. I will say Franklin does not have a great record against ranked teams. And while they do play a couple this year, I still think that they are in a much better position now than they were before. They got a tough matchup going into Morgantown week 1 with a new offensive coordinator, but they got a veteran quarterback in Drew Aller and one of the, in my opinion, the second best running back tandem in the country. Now, outside of the top 10, number 11, the Tennessee Volunteers. I'm going to butcher this name. Nico Iamaleava. Nico Iamaleava. However you pronounce it, he's a talented player, right? He hasn't had much time on the field, but he's going to be very talented. I think in a couple of years we're going to be talking about him in a Heisman tendency and possibly a first round tendency. But what's going to really help this rookie quarterback blossom is James Pierce Jr., possibly the best defensive player in football right now outside of maybe Josh Downs, and that's even stretching it. And a very, very stout Tennessee defense, right? We've seen some high scoring Tennessee games where, looking back a couple years against Alabama, where Hendon Hooker really had to take over in that game, and Alabama had to mess up a few times. Tennessee is going to, I think, play a different brand of football this year, where they are going to be holding teams at will and really controlling the clock and giving the key name of the game for them is giving Nico time to move the ball, time to see. If Tennessee can control the ball game on the defensive line, in the trenches, in the defense in general, we're going to see a very, very good Tennessee team that could absolutely rival the one of years past. Number 12, and I almost, looking back at this after a week, kind of feel like they're a little low. Notre Dame. Every year we fall into the trap putting Notre Dame like 5th overall, and then they go and lose a couple bad ones, and then this, that, and the other, and now we're in a situation where maybe they squeak into the playoffs, and then they, it's like a few years ago when they get stomped by Alabama, and that it happens. But I think we're looking at a different Notre Dame team. New quarterback, Riley Leonard from Duke. They also got RJ Oben, another very highly touted prospect from Duke, right? And Marcus Freeman, their head coach, he has done a lot for their culture of that team. I think that we're looking at a new Notre Dame team, not the same one that we had under Chip Kelly, but a very, very different team. Number 13, Clemson. Clemson is now entering the stages of where dynasties fall, right? We've seen the last 5 to 7 years of Clemson as incredible. Dabo Sweeney has been one of the best head coaches in that stretch. Outside of Nick Saban, maybe Kirby Smart, you're looking at one of the best head coaches. Here's where I find a problem. He hasn't adapted much. Not to say that he hasn't made changes and he hasn't changed what he's done, but he has not adapted in use of the transfer portal, in use of um, you know, a lot of different ways. It seems like Dabo is a little in the past. That being said, he is still a phenomenal recruiter and has put together a great team, right? He's now let Cade Klubnik play for a whole year. They stumbled a little bit last year, but all these questions, all these criticisms will be completely thwarted if one of two things happens. If they go out and they beat the 2 touchdown spread against Georgia and or even beat Georgia, all that gets silenced. We're done. We're done. Clemson's back. They never left. Dabo's a great head coach, all that. Or if they go, make it close and then go on and win the ACC and even win a game or two or find themselves in a national championship at the end of this thing, everything's thwarted. But if they regress further, if we see a 4-loss season, 5-loss season, and they drop some really bad ones, maybe it might be time to consider changing our ways a little bit. As of now, I think Clemson is poised for a very good season and is just as capable of winning the ACC as any of the other big dogs involved. Which is another conference that I can see only having one real representative. Number 14. I'm a little high on them, but USC, Southern Cali. Lincoln Riley has never had a bad quarterback. That's not to say he hasn't had quarterbacks that might not have been good under other people, but he has had 3 Heisman winning quarterbacks, and all of which have been drafted in the first, except for one, which was the 4th round. Right. So I have no reason to believe that Miller Moss will be any different. The only thing that they really have, negative against them right now is their defense going to be worth anything? And they fired their D coordinator halfway through last year. I mean, that couldn't be good, right? You're talking about a team that was competing for the Big 12 with Caleb Williams a couple years ago and is now has huge question marks about their defense. Now, they did get some solid transfer portal acquisitions. They have, every year they have this, but they have an exceptional recruiting class this year. And if Miller Moss comes out and does Lincoln Riley production things, then I think that they're going to be just fine. And I think at the end of it, we might be seeing them playing some very, very meaningful games in late November, ones that could potentially put them into a playoff. By these rankings, they're on the outside looking in, but so are a lot of teams right now. Number 15, and I'm a little hesitant to put them here. I almost want to put them higher, but Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Sooners have quite the schedule. They have probably, outside of Florida, the hardest SEC schedule. And I mean, I can't think of a better way to have such a rude awakening, right? They have a 3-week stretch where they're just getting back to back to back top 25, top 15 teams. This is going to be the biggest test that Brent Venables has had. And I mean, but he's delivered before. I think this year they have not a better quarterback, but a better fit in Jackson Arnold. They effectively chose, it's Oklahoma. They can afford it. They effectively chose to let Dillon Gabriel walk in hopes that Jackson Arnold will be everything they want. As I mentioned earlier with Oregon, Dillon Gabriel fits much better as someone with design schemes who can fit it into tight windows, who's a really, really good and I don't want to use this in a negative connotation, but game manager, right? Jackson Arnold is someone who can stretch the field. And with the burners that they have on the side, Jaleel Farouk, et cetera, they need this kind of arm talent in order to really be able to move passes. And I think with the schedule that they have, a 9-3 Oklahoma is absolutely in contention for a playoff spot. I mean, again, the great thing that I think about this 12 team playoff is you're going to have a lot of fan bases, a lot of teams playing very, very meaningful football in November, even if they're not necessarily in it. A loss from a team could definitely, definitely kick them out, or another crazy upset could absolutely change the entire balance of the college football landscape. Number 16, LSU. Uh, they had a Heisman winning quarterback last year and were not able to win the SEC. Now, it's the SEC. The SEC is the premier conference of college football, at least as we're led to believe. Coming up and, having 40 plus point games most weeks is something that should lead you to an almost undefeated season. But man, was their defense bad last year. They were giving up 30 plus points in conference, and they were giving up even more out of conference. They got destroyed by Florida State earlier in the year, who ended up getting destroyed by Georgia, right? So beginning of the year versus end of the year, there's a lot of things to work out, but they don't if that offense wasn't on, they weren't going to be anything. And now with Garrett Nussmeier taking the helm, I hope I pronounced that correctly, we're going to really see if their defense can keep them in games. Because if we see what we saw from their defense last year, I'll be surprised if this team eclipses 7 wins. A little bit of an exaggeration, but not really. Now, if their defense can do what they needed to do, and with the talent that they have on everywhere on that offense, Garrett Nussmeier doesn't need to do as much as Jaden Daniels does if their defense can help them control the clock. It's going to be some pretty exciting matchups this year in the SEC, and I'm pretty excited to watch them. Number 17, Arizona. Arizona has what you might be able to call the best QB1, wide receiver one combination in the league. They don't necessarily have the number one quarterback. They have the arguably number one wide receiver in McMillan. But the combination of the two might be the best in the league. They lost their head coach this year, and similarly to Alabama, I thought, we're going to see a mass exodus. It's going to be bad, right? This is a team that ended the year, I believe they ended the year ranked last year, were ranked at points last year, that looked like they had a lot of talent. And then Jed Fish goes and takes the job at Washington, the team that just played in the national championship. They hired Brent Brennan, and he was able to plug those leaking holes in the ship real quick. They kept their quarterback, kept their wide receivers, kept a lot of their defense, and in a Big 12 that seems super wide open, we could see Arizona make a real run at this thing. I mean, I believe, yeah, they're the only other Big 12 team since Utah at number 9, right? It's really them, Utah, and a handful of other teams kind of all jumbled up in the same area, just all competing. And they're going to eat themselves alive, but one of them's got to make the playoffs, right? And why can't it be Arizona? Number 18, Miami. Mario Cristobal has kept a tight ship down there. Cam Ward coming in is hopefully going to help them a lot. We don't want to talk about what happened with Georgia Tech last year, but it didn't really feel like they were going to go much of anywhere with Tyler Van Dyke anyway, right? They got some transfer running backs. They got the one from Oregon State. They got, like I mentioned, they got Cam Ward from Oregon State. Sorry, from Washington State. My bad. They have returning, Xavier Restrepo. They have what you could consider to be one of the best defensive lines in the country right now. I mean, if they're going to have a real big test week 1 going into Gainesville, new offense, new offensive pieces, a lot of new pieces on defense, just a really really hard place to be successful. Um but I mean, they're 2.5 point favorites in Gainesville. I mean, we'll see what happens with this new technology, the helmet things. If that breaks, that could have a huge impact on how everything goes. But, you know, Cam Ward could be their answer for now. You know, part of it was moving the ball last year. And if he can do that and they can do that effectively, if I will be impressed, win or lose, I will be impressed with Miami if I see sustained long drives. If this game just turns into a track meet where they're just launching bombs and watching, Eugene Wilson and Xavier Restrepo exchange deep balls, that's not as impressive. That's not sustainable. But if we can see a couple real sustained drives from Miami, followed by a couple 3-and-outs, 6-and-outs plays, drives like that, this could be a really scary Miami team. And after, in 2 more spots, when we talk about the fiasco of week 0, who knows, right? Clemson has question marks. Florida State, big question marks. Miami's seems to be the most rock solid, despite them having the most new pieces, if that makes sense. Number 19, a team that really hasn't been on a lot of radars from what I see, but Nebraska. Listening to Matt Rule and fans of Nebraska talk about Nebraska, I mean, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Nebraska seems to be having a fun place. Lincoln seems to be an incredible place to be right now. Dylan Raiola seems like he's clicking on all cylinders. They got a whole bunch of talent all around him. I really think that Nebraska is going to shock some faces, and who knows what this year will turn into, but we can see them as an 8, 9, 10 win team, especially if some teams come in not expecting it. Starting a rookie quarterback, rookie freshman quarterback, huge questions. But Matt Rule, former NFL coach, college mastermind, if he seems like very confident in him, he says they're ahead of schedule. I'm inclined to believe him. Now the big one, what I think we're all wanting to hear. Florida State. Florida State, in my preseason poll before week 0, was number 10. Florida State now has dropped 10 spots to number 20. And I think that might have been a little generous. I think this comes down to a coaching problem, if I'm being honest. I think they have had a poor understanding of what they had in DJU. DJU is not going to be that player who takes over games, who makes crazy deep throws, who is going to superhero you, put a cape on, and fly you over the finish line. DJ is going to play smart football, take his checkdowns, and rely on a good run game to confuse the defense and have them, confuse the defense and let them react, right? That run game was nowhere to be seen. The defensive line that we heard so much about was extinct. Their defensive backs looked flat. I'm pretty sure there were a couple ankles left in Ireland. I mean, they didn't look like a team that is upset at getting robbed of a playoff spot last year. I really wanted Florida State to come in with a vengeance, with just fury, and beat Georgia Tech by 50. Come in and say, we deserved that playoff spot last year, and you took it from us. But no, they came in expecting to win, looking past this, looking towards their later ranked matches that they feel so entitled to have. Truth be told, if Georgia Tech and Florida State played again on a neutral field in Georgia Tech again today, I would probably still bet on Florida State. I mean, especially after what happened. But on the other hand, right, Florida State bashing aside, good for Georgia Tech. I mean, that's a huge win. They've quietly been 5-0 against their last five ranked opponents. I mean, we saw what happened with Miami last year. We have Florida State this year. They're not a team to be trifled with, apparently. I mean, Haynes King played amazing, and shout out to their kicker. Game-winning field goal, 59-yarder at the half to go up. I mean, to tie it. Like, they're they went out there and played some great football. They weren't scared of the preseason number 10 ranking. They were just ready to play some football, and that's exactly what they did, and they played it great. So hats off to you, Georgia Tech. That was some good ball. All right. Here's where we go on a little bit of a Big 12 run. Number 21, Oklahoma State. They have the reigning Doak Walker Award year winner, Ollie Gordon. And I mean, production wise, he will probably do it again. Right. I mean, well, I don't know. I'm not a fortune teller, but I'm sometimes right, I guess. They have an incredibly veteran offensive line. They have an incredibly veteran quarterback who was what he backed up Patrick Mahomes 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Alan Bowman at Georgia Tech. Now he's at Oklahoma State. Right. They have a crazy veteran team, and Mike Gundy is sneakily a top probably 5, 6, 7 head coach in the league right now. If Ollie Gordon can get just a little bit of that magic that he had before, I think it's going to be an incredible run uh, for him. And you know, Heisman hopes, who knows? But again, the Big 12 is super wide open, and they competed last year in the championship against a team that doesn't even exist anymore in the league, in the conference. So we'll see what happens. Next, we got Kansas State, another school that went with a younger quarterback in favor of a younger quarterback, opposed to a quarterback that already won a lot with them. They feel very confident about Avery Johnson. And I mean, they should be. He is, you know, a borderline dual threat quarterback who accounted for nearly 250 yards in their bowl game last year. I mean, against, a very senior NC State team who played in an ACC championship. Like, I'm sorry, no, Louisville played in the ACC championship, but regardless, an NC State team that played in that has been very good over the last couple of years. They chose Avery Johnson over Will Howard, who beat Texas Christian in overtime in the Big 12 championship just a couple of years ago, because they are confident that what they have in Avery Johnson is going to be better. And I mean, it's a similar thing, right? We'll see with Will Howard, how he does against that Big Ten competition. But I mean, Avery Johnson, crazy arm, real good pocket mobility, real good pocket presence. Just feels like he's moving in slow motion out there when you see him. Just an uber talented player overall, and I'm very excited to see him. We got a glimpse of it last year in their bowl game, but we're gonna get to see a whole season of it this year. All right, we're almost done. 23, West Virginia. There's a little bit of a homer pick, not a little bit, a lot of bit of a homer pick. Those who know me know I'm a big West Virginia guy, but I mean, look at the numbers. Like, Garrett Green is the highest graded returning quarterback to the Big 12. That's including names like Cam Rising, Shadur Sanders, Noah Fifita, right? We're talking about some very talented quarterbacks that didn't have as high a passer rating. And this is coming from a guy who people thought couldn't pass, who were confident couldn't pass. When I saw him opening up deep bombs last year, I was like, who told Garrett Green he was allowed to pass? I mean, while West Virginia doesn't have, very highly rated receiving talent, they don't have a lot of returning talent, right? That's the problem. A lot of these grades come out of returning production, and Traylon Ray, uh, Braylon Ray, Traylon Bray, all these wide receivers with similar sounding names, they're all very talented, and they're all going to make a huge impact. Um, Not to mention, big old tight end Cole Taylor. He's returning. Probably one of the best tight ends in the country at the moment. And that running back tandem. I mean, Jaheim White and CJ Donaldson. That's up there. That's probably third in the league right now, behind Ohio State, Penn State. Then it goes right to West Virginia, a team who has recently led the entire country, well, the entire Power Five, is now Power Four landscape in rushing yards. We'll see what happens. I think this game, they have a really tough week one against Penn State. Should be interesting. It was an interesting one last year. It should be interesting again this year. We'll see what happens. Number 24, Iowa. Iowa could be so much higher if they went out and spent some money. I mean, look, Cade McNamara can have, if he has a 2021-esque season, they're going to be a borderline undefeated team. If he has a year like he did last year, they're going to suck, right? You can't, defense wins championships, but you need an offense, right? Like the best defense of all time in college, 2001 Miami, would have gone 8-4 that year without an offense, which is incredible. Don't get me wrong, but you still need an offense to win those 4 games. You can't move the ball, you can't run the ball, you can't pass the ball. Your defense is going to get tired, right? Your defense is going to be is if you give the other team triple the time of possession that you have, you're just not going to be able to win ball games, right? It's not like you have some deep balls every dialed up every time. You're just stalling out and giving the ball back to the other team. Possibly the best defense in the country, and I think that with a lot of with a severe upgrade to the offense, similar situation to USC, right? They need a defense. Iowa needs an offense. You combine those teams, you get the best team in the country, possibly, and also the worst team in the country if you take Iowa's offense and USC's defense, right? So Iowa can put a semblance of an offense up there. We're going to see a crazy good team. If not, it's going to be more of the same Iowa football. And finally, to round out the top 25, Colorado. I want to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit. I want to believe in what Deion Sanders is doing. I have my criticisms of Shadur. I don't think anybody, especially not me, has any criticisms of Travis Hunter. And I have some criticisms of how much media attention he's been getting. But if you look at what he did last year, everyone's like, "Oh, 4-8 team. Well, why are they getting so much coverage?" They were a 1-10 team, and they lost. What is it? They lost 8. 6 of their 8 losses last year were by a score or less. Right, and this was against good teams. This was against Pac-12 teams, who had a lot of ranked teams last year. This is against some really good teams and a couple, astronomical breakdowns. Cough, cough, Stanford game, right? Their offensive line was atrociously bad last year. If they get even an okay offensive line, if they increase production at all, they could easily be an 8-9 win team. I'm not saying it'll happen. It still needs to be played out, but they have the talent to be right up there with the rest of them. That's going to round out my top 25 for this week. If you made it this far, thanks for listening. Real quick before you go, my honorable mentions, there's a lot this week. It's fun having the preseason when you can just blindly throw out a bunch of honorable mentions, but I got Kansas, Texas A&M, Virginia Tech, North Texas, Duke, NC State, South Carolina, Boise State, Liberty, Appalachian State, Washington, Tulane, Cal, TCU, and Georgia Tech. I think you can make a case for just about any of these teams to make it in. Quick side note about Boise State, actually. Saw that they are not going with Malachi Nelson. Interesting situation. I'll be interested to see if he ends up getting a chance this year. But hey, stars don't mean anything once you get into pads. Like I said, thanks for listening, and be back next week with my new updated rankings. Bye-bye.